Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session today entitled Artificial Intelligence and the Impact of Exponential Technology on Legal. My name is Austin Hoppert, and I'm here with Joe Raczynski. Thank you so much for joining us today. Joe Raczynski. He is an innovator, an early adopter of all things computer related. His primary focus is around the future of technology, and he speaks around the world about legal tech, cybersecurity, blockchain, artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, and drone tech. He also writes about the future of technology as it impacts the crossroads of our personal and professional lives, particularly in the legal sector. He co-hosts a podcast with a tech focus under the umbrella of Thomson Reuters and serves as a mentor with the Columbia IBM Blockchain Accelerator. He is a cybersecurity committee member at the University of South Florida and a presidential committee appointee to the American Bar Association Center for Innovation Governing Council. Currently, Joseph is with the Thomson Reuters Legal is currently with Thomson Reuters Legal managing a team of technologists for the large law, corporate, and government divisions in the U.S. He serves top law firms in the world consulting on legal trends and customizing Thomson Reuters legal tech solutions for enhanced workflows. You can connect with Joseph at joetechnologist.com or josephraczynski.com or on Twitter at joeraz. And with that, I hand it over to Joe.
Austin, thank you so much. I apologize for all those words. I gotta shape that thing down. Cut it down a little bit. All
Not a problem.
Thank you very much. All right, I am really looking forward to this today. We're talking about artificial intelligence and, of course, the impact of exponential technology on legal. What does that mean? Well, we're going to unpack it. I'm very excited. Let's jump in and talk about the topics themselves. So first and foremost, what I'm going to do is just a quick preface about what is happening right now with technology, why we're even talking about AI as it filters into this space. So let's level set on that first. Then we'll talk about defining artificial intelligence, the history, the future, where it may impact you in your practice, as well as the business of law going forward in this space, because it certainly is creeping, but in the near future, it's going to probably flow pretty quickly. So let's talk about that. And then we'll get into the practical uses of AI today. So litigation tools, transactional tools, things of that nature. All right. So what is happening now? I've been talking about this for quite some time, and I think it's fair to level set. So I apologize for those who have seen this in the past if you have. But what I'd like to do is just sort of conceptualize where we are as a society in a time where it's been like nothing else we've ever experienced. In all of humanity, the change that we are seeing today is fantastic. It's also frightening at some points in time, but we're talking about exponential growth, right? So we're familiar with this pictorial of a arrow going up at an exponential growth rate, basically from when we were in grammar school, whatever the case might be. So you know what that looks like, right? But what I want to do is sort of take a step back very quickly and think about what linear growth feels like. And this comes from Singularity University. And this is the idea of us trying to conceptualize and wrap our heads around what we're used to before we go to the stuff that we're not so used to and will have an impact on us professionally, but also personally. So the first example that I want to give is this beautiful lily pad. And what I want you to think about is how long would it take for one lily pad per day to fill up an acre pond? Well, it would actually, if so one grew every single day, it would take 119 years to cover that entire pond. It's crazy to think about, but that's what we're used to. That's what we're familiar with. Our brains, literally our physical brains, have not changed in roughly 200,000 years. I did my DNA test, probably a year and a half ago at this point in time, if not a little bit longer. And when it came back, the cool things that I saw, one of them was the fact that my grandmother, far, 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 far removed, grew up on the plains of Africa and Eastern Africa, in fact. And what it said was, in my head, was that what did my grandmother know? And what did she experience with her family, with her friends? Well, she knew where to hunt. She knew where to gather. She knew where the fresh water was, where the water that she probably doesn't want to touch is. And so all of this stuff was local. it was linear. Her family, her connections, all of that was something she could wrap her head around because that's what people have been familiar with for hundreds of thousands of years. That has changed dramatically. I mean, even over the last 50 years, even in the last 10 years, this stuff is changed so dramatically that it's difficult for us to wrap our heads around what's coming down the road in 10 years, in 20 years. I mean, it was only 11 years ago, 12 years ago, that we did not even have the iPhone. These are monumental moments in time that will start to creep into the way we do things, right? So going back to that other example, when we were talking about what linear growth feels like, and now we're going to apply the exponential growth as it applies to that beautiful little lily, right? So in this instance, you have a farm, right? I would love to have a farm with a beautiful pond. And on that acre pond, you have these lily pads growing. And the question that I ask you is, if one lily pad grows on day one, then continues to grow and double that instance every single day until by day 30, it's completely covered. How many days did it take until the pond was half full of lily pads? And if you think about this for a few seconds, you might guess, and I guess I think initially incorrectly, but if you think about it a little bit more carefully, you're like, okay, what does that look like? Well, on day 20, only 0.1%, 0.01% was actually covered. All the way up into day 25, you're only at 3% of that pond is covered. Of course, it's day 29. So the second to last day, you're at finally 50% of the pond being covered. So clearly day 30, it's 100% covered. This is the point. We are at this point of inflection where we may be right around here. So day 26, day 27, when it comes to the technologies that we interact with every single day, such that over the course of the next 10, 20 years, we're going to be moving at such a clip, it's going to be difficult for us to even consider all of the possibilities that are just beyond us, that are 2 years out. And to that extent, things like this pop up. Again, I apologize if you've seen this one before. I love it, so I bring it up. This is MIT student, and he has this bizarre contraption. It wraps around his ear, goes along his chin, and up to his lips. And what it allows him to do with the 4 sensors that are in there is that when he thinks of something, he's actually able to transmit that through this device to another IoT connected device. The instance of what they described initially was that he was able to sit on the couch and change the channels of his TV. Very cool, very cool. But you're at a point where maybe a husband and wife, 2 partners are together and they both are wearing these devices. Mind reading technology. Outrageous to think about, but that's what we're at. That's where we are at right now. We're on the precipice of all of these changes as they filter into our lives. Drones. Now, I've been in the drones for quite some time now. I have this drone that's literally 6 inches wide. It's 249 grams, which is tiny. It's far less than even my cell phone, I think, at this point. It goes 10 kilometers, so 7 miles away. Films perfect HD 4K video. I do not take it that far. So these are the types of things that we're starting to see right now. One cool concept that came about a long time ago was, hey, with drone technology, could we do something with that that's functional, that's helpful for people? And in Australia, where you have all these lifeguards sitting up on their perches looking at people potentially struggling in the water, what do they have to do? Well, they have to jump off that perch once they see them struggling in the water, run across the hot sands, dive into the water, big waves, eventually get out to them, maybe 100 meters out, 100 yards out, and then save them. What if you were able to launch a drone within 15 seconds, fly it above those people that are struggling, and then drop some inflatable, and then they can then go to that inflatable and save themselves? Well, that sort of things happened. So I'll play the video very quickly for you, but it flew across, then it dropped this thing, and that could be done in about 60 seconds. The time savings with these types of technologies as they converge, as they start to help, is incredible. That's the direction we're moving in. Now, the second kind of bizarre one that I'll go through very quickly is the biotech spinach heart. You might be like, what in the world is this? This is someone's genius idea of taking a spinach leaf and basically growing human DNA around that, and then turning it into a heart. So it actually beat for, I believe, 60 seconds. It's fantastic to think about. And what I won't do is play the video, but you'll get an idea of what that would look like. This is basically DNA around that, and then they inject just red water, red dyed water into this sort of thing. But this is the sort of direction that we're going to start to see things move. So this is how fast they're going. The next one is wireless power. Now, if you've had clearly any of the new iPhone devices have had this, Android's had it for quite some time, probably 4 or 5 years from now. But imagine your TV on the screen or your lights in the ceiling. None of that has connection directly to a power source. Instead, it's being wirelessly powered through devices that sort of spread this ecosystem, almost like your Wi-Fi, but that charges and that feeds everything in your society at home. This is obviously kind of just a quick look into what that might be like. Another leap forward is just this. If we're all together, I might ask you, hey, how old do you think a baby born today might live to? Like if you had a child born today, because of those advancements, like what we saw with that spinach heart of all things, a baby born today would live to 125 years, which is remarkable to think about, right? So we're even at a point, and this is absolutely bonkers, and something that goes back to when I was first starting to get involved in cryptocurrency in 2011. People were like, what are you doing? Why are you spending time on that? And I was like, I don't even know myself. But we're again at a point where the zany ideas are coming true. So we're talking about a point in time where you can soon interact with your dog or cat. So you'll be able to actually interact with that dog or cat because there'll be devices that can understand what they're thinking. So almost connecting into their versions of that, their thought process, and extrapolating out what those words might be. And that's probably going to be a second or third grader, but you'll be able to interact with them at some level. You can only imagine what the legal implications of that will be. Will dogs have greater rights? Something to think about. We'll see. Who knows? Probably not. Ultimately, fundamentally, what we're talking about is the democratization of technology. And this is what I am so passionate about, because we're talking about areas of the world that are leapfrogging technology, such that maybe I grew up in a certain part of Latin America and I didn't have access to a laptop computer. But now I have access to a phone because it becomes so cheap, an Android device that allows me to do things that I've never been able to do before, which we'll talk about in just a second. But having the ability to get a hold of and access technology like we've never been able to do before is fantastic. In the example of the cell phone, right? It was, I dare say, took 10 hours to charge the original cell phone, that Zach Morris phone, the big old brick phone. It only had 60 minutes of talk time and it cost $4,500. Now you can go on to eBay and you can get a phone for 50 cents, a good old school flip phone, not necessarily the newest iPhone, but you get the idea. That democratization of technology is filtering in and is having an impact on the way that we look at things. Next, three distinct forces at play. The first one is cloud storage. So ubiquitous cloud storage, where it used to be very expensive to get memory for computers, for your phone or whatever, what have you. We're now at a point where you can get a chip the size of my fingernail from Amazon that holds 500 gigs of information. So set context for that. In 1955, IBM had a computer the size of a typical bedroom, and it had 5 megabytes of RAM. Tiny piece of memory versus what you could have today. So we're at a point where law firms, organizations across the board are considering cloud because it's easier. Hopefully it's more secure, but it's everywhere and easily accessible. The second of the three forces is processing power. So each one of the chips that you hear about, these processors, they're in your phone, they're on your computer, right? Let's set context for that. On the x-axis, you actually have time. On the y-axis, you have calculations per second for a $1,000 computer. All right, what does that mean? It means that in 2001, you bought a brand new computer, maybe from Best Buy or whatever you would have bought it from back then, and you spent $1,000 on that computer, It processed as fast as a gnat's brain, a bug's brain. So fast forward to 2009, you buy a brand new computer. Maybe you bought it off of Amazon at that point in time. The brand new computer would process as fast as a mouse's brain. Pretty significant jump forward. 2024. So a few years from now, we're talking about a brand new computer, whatever that will look like, and probably off of Amazon, maybe somewhere else. It will process as fast as a human's brain. My brain, right? Well, maybe not mine, but someone's a little more keen than me. Fast forward to 2044. What will that $1,000 computer process as fast as? Well, it'll process as fast as all of mankind, projected to be 8 to 9 billion people. Fantastic. So we're at unlimited memory, unlimited processing power. Those are two significant things when we start to talk about the third being AI. We'll talk about AI in just a second because that's the theme of where we're going. But there's no way, no how, we would be even talking about AI if it weren't for those first two pieces and where it's leading us as a society, especially in the legal industry as we become the practitioners or on the business of law side, because it all starts to converge. So those three forces at play, infinite cloud storage, infinite processing power, and artificial intelligence, leads us to this. Artificial intelligence. I am a huge fan of history, so I beg your forgiveness on this. We're going to go through a little bit about the history, and then we'll get into the tangible examples for AI. The first example in this space is the game of chess. Back in the 80s, I believe, you had Garry Kasparov, Russian grandmaster chess player in the world, and he was pitted against IBM. And IBM, Deep Blue, Big Blue, came up with their algorithm that no one thought their algorithm could beat the best chess player in the world. It's a complicated game. It seems impossible for him to be able to do such a thing. So sure enough, Garry Kasparov played against the best AI at that point in time, and he lost. And this was jaw-dropping at that moment in time. And they played many matches, and he lost the vast majority of them. So we then go into the future a little bit at that point in time, and we look at this and we say, okay, what's the next example where a lot of us opened our eyes to what's coming with AI? And that was the game of chess. And the game of chess, in the game of Jeopardy. And when we're talking about this, we're talking about at that point in time, the two best players of Jeopardy competing against IBM Watson. And IBM Watson did something kind of funky here. What they ended up doing was pulling all of Wikipedia offline, and they did metadata. So data about that data. So trying to understand what's in that particular Wikipedia. They put it into their server, so basically a bunch of memory, and they ran their algorithms against that. And they said, okay, Alex Trebek, we're going to engage with him, and we need to respond. What do we need to do? Well, you see on your screen that little section, that's called a stack rank, essentially. So the AI is looking at the possible answers or questions in this instance and trying to find the best grouping of those. And it's not giving the single best answer, but it's giving you a stack rank, a grouping of them, which could be upwards of 10 or 100 different possibilities. And in this instance, we're talking about albinism being a 98% hit on that. What did we find out from this? Well, the two best Jeopardy players in the world lost to IBM Watson, and it was significant. People were just like, it's using a lot of things in here. It's using speech recognition. It's using the ability to cull through all this data very quickly to find the best answers or questions in this instance and serve that up. Big leap forward. But the biggest leap forward, more than likely, is the final of the three examples. And I'm going to draw a distinction between the first two and the last one as I finish this particular thing up. In this last one, we're talking about the game Go. The game Go is very popular in certain parts of Asia. And quite simply, it's a 21 by 21 board. It's one person pitted against another one. The object of the game is to take my black stones and try to take up as much of the board compared to the white stones that are out there. So one-on-one. And what's interesting about this game is that once I put my particular piece down, the next person puts down their piece. There's 150,000 possibilities after that. Whereas in the game of chess, I move my first piece, my counterpart moves their first piece, there's only 300 possibilities. So in the first and second example, you're talking about brute force AI, which means the computer, the memory, and the processing power are all trying to figure this stuff out at once. And they're able to try to figure out all of it such that they can serve up the best examples as quickly as possible. But in this other game, Go, it's way more difficult. I mean, we'll get to the point where quantum computing actually gets to the point where it can figure this stuff out very quickly. But in this instance, we're talking about deep learning, which we'll talk about in a second. We're talking about the ability for the machine and the algorithm to truly understand and look for the white space, the space that we never dreamt of before. And so in this example, we actually had the third or fourth best player of Go in the world pitted against, in this instance, Google's AI, and they gave that Google AI a 4-move head start. And in the end, the Google AI won, but they had a 4-move head start. A lot of the biggest futurists in the world were like, "Oh my goodness, this is a big deal," but it's going to take it's going to take 10 years before we get to the point where AI is pitted against the best man or woman of Go in the world, and AI will win. 2 years later, after that statement came out, head to head, best player of Go versus AI, and AI won. Jaws dropped across the world, and like, this is significant. So since then, what we've seen is Google take this AI and these deep learning capabilities and apply them to their second biggest amount of electricity use, the second biggest expense that they have, which is electricity. And they basically have this black box that sits in the corner. It culls through everything and looks through the data as carefully as possible as compared to their data scientists, the men and women looking through all this, trying to save as much electricity as they possibly can. And after like a few weeks, the AI was able to drop and save Google about 15% of their electricity. Fantastic, amazing. Never thought it was possible. They thought that this was a freak occurrence. So they turned that thing off and they saw right away, went back up to where it was before. These types of tools, these types of cartridges, AI cartridges that we'll talk about in a second, are now being applied to other industries. You could imagine what industry might be coming next to apply these types of algorithms to. Well, it'll be legal in the not too distant future. So AI, when it comes to legal, let's talk about this now. So the definition that I like to conceptualize for my head is AI comes down to an algorithm. And what is an algorithm? It's almost an if-then statement. So if this happens, then do this. A tad more complicated view of this is the theory and development of computer systems being able to perform tasks normally requiring human intelligence, such as that visual perception, the speech recognition, the decision making, and then of course, translation between languages. That's how groups look at this in terms of AI. Again, kind of a newer term that we're starting to use over the last 5 years, but something that we can all universally say has started to fall into this space. Now, I kind of just mentioned this, but just to recap, the reason why all of this is coming together right now are those processors, like in the upper right-hand corner. Those things are getting faster and faster, so Moore's law has come into play, which basically says every 12 to 18 months, those chips, the memory are doubling. So that, again, that exponential growth thing, that stuff is happening, and therefore we're getting to the point of being able to leverage the tools to be able to digitize data, to open data initiatives, and to create a better way of understanding behavior around all of these pieces. And you're seeing the biggest companies in the world, the Microsofts, the Amazons, the Samsungs, leveraging all of these pieces together to be able to build out new ways of doing things, new workflows, of which we'll talk about in depth in just a second. Okay. So going back to this original idea of artificial intelligence, we see that as the biggest bucket. Now, it came from the movies for the most part, and maybe back in the 50s and 60s from sci-fi books. But I want to break down AI versus machine learning. What is machine learning versus deep learning? So we'll break those all down in just a second here. AI, like I said, again, sort of repeat, is a rules-based system. Has logic, has reasoning. When you start to build out these models that if something should happen, then something else should happen, then you start to see the reasoning that they bake into it. You can all think about your own reasoning. While it's not that simplistic, there's a basis for that at its core so that it can extrapolate out and start to do really cool things in this space. So it's knowledge representation at its essence. Now, a subset of AI is machine learning. Machine learning is really the direction of where we're starting to see the data scientists spend most of their time. And then underneath the auspices of machine learning, supervised machine learning, unsupervised machine learning, and then deep learning. These three I will jump into. I'll spend some time on to break down what they mean and what implications they have within the legal industry in just a second here. So deep learning is also neural networks. That's the game Go that we saw and the algorithms that applied to that game Go. Some whiz bang stuff. Like it's out there. It's extraordinarily complicated, very cool stuff, but becoming more and more used every day. So what AI can do and sometimes cannot do. Think about it as an input, a response, and then you can look at the applications on the right-hand side. So if a typical person can do a mental task with, let's say, less than 1 second of thought, you can probably automate that using AI now or in the near future. And that's only getting a little more sophisticated. So on the input side, think about a picture, and we'll go through some of this, but a picture. Are those human faces? You can now clearly train a computer. Is that human or is that a cat? A loan application. Will they repay the loan? Now you can look at various parameters based on their credit history, based on all sorts of things, which we may think is fair or not. So those are things that need to be worked out. But those types of things are starting to filter in, right? AI plus user information, ad information. So you start to see these things start to come together. Audio clips, being able to transcribe those things. English sentences, and it gets more sophisticated as we start to talk about the English language or language in general, because that's a core component around the legal industry, is language and understanding what the intent of that was. So that's where AI starts to bleed into this space. So let's focus in on that second bubble, right? So the AI was the biggest bubble. The second bubble is the natural language processing part, which is machine learning. So machine learning. I'll work my way around this. And each one of you will be like, I get it. I totally understand this. So machine translation. A lot of AI is humans intervening, creating these rule-based systems such that maybe years ago or even a decade ago, someone went in and said, okay, this symbol in Japanese means this in English or means this letter in our English alphabet. And so that's machine translation. It's almost defining a one-to-one. If this happens, then do this. This letter A equals whatever symbol it is in Japanese or in Farsi or in Arabic. Whatever the case is, you're drawing a one-to-one. While there's some give and take in there, you get the idea behind machine translation. The next one, moving up the board here, is information retrieval. All right, pretend that you are part of a small law firm. And at that small law firm, you want a website. So you create this website. It's 3 pages, 3 distinct web pages. The first web page is your landing page. It has the name of the firm, has some contact information, has the essence that you practice in IP outside of Washington, D.C. Maybe you're in Arlington County, close to the PTO, right, in Alexandria. So you're able to create this website, and it has, let's say, on all 3 web pages, has 500 words, maybe 1,000 words among your bio and all the things that you're working on. Information retrieval basically has every single word. It knows every word on all those 3 pages, such that when someone goes to do a search on your page, it's able to see, this word that you just searched on shows up on page 3. This word shows up on page 2. Information retrieval, very basic, and that's obviously the most basic of examples. That's the direction we're talking about. The next one, sentiment analysis. What is sentiment analysis? Groupings of words that are either positive or negative or have a meaning that you can group together. So it might be how, try to think of a quick example off the top of my head. Things that are very positive, like it's a sunny day with no rain. All of these words you start to bunch together create sentiment around that. You can find that within words as you start to search, as you start to analyze. And so that's a sentiment analysis. Information extraction goes back to the metadata. So data about data. An example that I like to give is your kitchen. So what is in your kitchen? Distinct words that represent your kitchen. Refrigerator, sink, stove, oven, disposal. If you see all those words and then you as an eyeing that up, where do those fall? Well, that's kitchen. So metadata is you can look at the various words and then you can group that with kitchen. So that's kind of the information extraction, pulling words from ideas, from concepts, and then question and answering. Believe it or not, if you use Alexa, and I'll be quiet just in case you have one, and this is on a louder, not over headphones for you. If I say that word or say Google, whatever the case is, someone probably programs the question and answering that you did or the questions that you get back and forth initially. It was literally someone sitting there listening, programming a question and a possible answer. If you were to create one of these skills right now for Amazon Alexa, you can create this and you actually write the questions and write the answers, and then over time it starts to learn from that. So that's a questioning and answering using natural language processing, also known as NLP. Okay, so machine language, when it comes to data sets, the essence of this slide is to simply say this. AI needs loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of data. Data is king. And then you can pull these algorithms off the shelf to point it at this data and to take a look at it. But what you want to do is get your big old host of information. Then you want a subset of that information to validate. So you have one repository of information, let's say it's sitting on a single hard drive with a billion documents. Then you have another hard drive, maybe off to the side, that has 100,000 documents. You test it, see how the data comes back and says, this is what we see that's novel, interesting. And then you might want to test that and validate that with additional data. So data sets are a big component to this whole thing. All right, computer vision. This falls into the space of e-discovery. So when we first started seeing artificial intelligence in this world, it came with e-discovery. So what is it doing? How is it working? So how does the technology itself work? If you want to find among your pictures that you upload that a cat exists in the picture that you upload to say, hey, what's in here? You needed to train it, right? So you had a billion pictures of cats and you took a subset of that and you said, hey, here is a cat in all of these pictures. And you identify that. You as an individual identify that cat. In the first instance, you classify, yes, this is a cat. In the second, you're classifying and localizing that cat fills up this part of your screen. Then it gets more sophisticated to object detection. That means the cat and the rubber ducky and the dog fill up these separate segments of that picture. The last, more sophisticated component of this, instance segmentation. So it's really defining exactly where that particular cat, dog, or duck may reside. The big deal is that you need loads and loads of data, as I said before, to be able to get to the point where the computer can understand the difference between things like this, right? What's the difference between the Chihuahua, depending on your accent, and the blueberry muffin? So I may even have a hard time seeing the difference between and among these pictures and a Chihuahua. Computers getting far more advanced, and I could tell you some really scary things that are going on around the world when it comes to image recognition, facial recognition. We'll hold off on that for the moment. But this is what you need to do with computer vision, such that if you have a billion documents that your team is working on with 100 attorneys that normally would have to comb through that looking for relevant information, well, the machine should help you out in this and help reduce the load from maybe, let's say, the billion down to 300,000, which still sounds daunting from my world. Next phase here, machine learning, the supervised learning versus unsupervised machine learning. To me, this could be very straightforward. It can get very complicated, but what I want to do is break it down so that it makes some sense. In the unsupervised machine learning world, we're talking about a machine that you give a boatload of data to, and you've picked an algorithm that's most appropriate for the data that you're looking at. And you say, algorithm, machine, go to task. And you literally say, here's the data. You know, come back in a week, come back in an hour, whatever the case is, and tell me what you learned. And it comes back a week later or an hour later, and it gives you a dashboard view into what it sees. These are themes. These are commonalities. These are juxtaposed thoughts or concepts and clustering of words or ideas. And it presents that up to you and says, this is what we learned. Kind of a cool thing, because there's typically things we as humans would not have been able to digest in those billion documents in such a rapid fashion, clearly. That's unsupervised. Supervised is slightly different in the sense that it's an iterative process. So it's again, you tell a machine, go to town, look through these billion documents and come back and tell me what you come up with. It comes back with some of this information, and then I'm looking at the dashboard view of this stuff and I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. It's something I would never have gathered. And then you hone it. So as a human, you then say, you know what? Drill into this subset of information. You know, try to tell me more about that clustering of words or that clustering of concepts. And then it goes and spends another hour or a week on that and pulls back more information. So back and forth, back and forth. You're teaching it and it's going in a different direction around that space. That's machine learning versus supervised and unsupervised. This is where it gets wackadoo, in my view, a little bananas. We're talking about neural networks, and this is the most sophisticated of all when we're talking about the bigger picture of AI. So neural networks. This is clustering of computers that are running algorithms that are almost speaking to each other. So imagine 10,000 machines. So computers, literally like the computer that you have, probably you're watching this on, could be big old desktop computer. So when you hear computer, when you hear servers, you hear nodes, they're essentially the same thing, but they might be more robust in nature, more robust than the computers that we need to do our daily work on. So they're clustered together, they're networked, so they're all connected to each other. And they're taking different components of what the algorithms are trying to do is understand different nodes and different data sets. And they're almost talking to each other, just like a brain. So what is the right side talking to the left sphere, right? Those two pieces are working together. Sometimes people are like, oh, this is more artistic side and this is more analytical side. Same sorts of things are going on here. They're thinking about things. They're not thinking about things, but they're analyzing things and they're coming up with commonalities that start to come together such that you get to the point where it's able to get the input and do an output very quickly, very easily. And this is the type of thing that's able to leverage what we saw earlier with that game Go. So this is what the sort of technology behind it is leveraging. So there are algorithms out there that are doing this sort of thing. They're starting to creep into the legal industry, and we're able to see new things being developed from that. Okay, the next one of the last ones I'll talk about on the machine learning front is overfitting. That's a technical term typically that data scientists use. All it is bias. One of the things that we hear about all the time is bias in AI, and it is real, and it is something that we all need to consider and think about. One is the original programmers may have had a certain bias about something, and that sort of filters into the way that those algorithms look at data. So we need to think about how that works and what we need to do to adjust that. In the example that I have here, let's pretend you all told me that there's this bakery down the street, Joe, that's amazing. They have this fudge cupcake that has this amazing vanilla icing. It has, jimmies on the top. If you're from the Northeast, has sprinkles for the rest of us. And it's amazing. And I haven't been there. And so I go down there and I'm like, they don't have it. They don't have it. Like everyone keeps telling me it's the most amazing thing and they don't have it. So there's a bias in there. There's this idea that, yeah, everyone thinks that that's true, but it's not, maybe, whatever the case is. Most important thing is, and this came to light recently for me when I spoke with a few data scientists, is that with and in algorithms that we're able to look at carefully, we can hopefully find the bias. With humans, it's a tad more difficult because it's more difficult to root out our unconscious bias. So while we're all working on making sure that we're as fair as possibly we can be around things, if you're able to determine that there's bias in the algorithm, the hope is that you can address that and you can adjust it. Because once you have bias in something, that can trickle through the entire data set and impact the entire way of looking at something. So ultimately, when I have spent time with firms and government agencies and corporations, 5 years ago, people were in the state of denial. So stage one, and that is GCs pushing back on things, firms and AFAs saying, all right, what can we do in this space? Hoping for no real change. We're at stage two. So stage two is resourcing. It's general counsel's rethinking in-house, working differently, thinking about alternative resourcing, and using these tools that are just incrementally making changes for the way that we do, the way we practice. So that's the sort of thing that we're at right now. Long term, depending on who you speak with, and on some days I'd say it's shorter than other days in terms of the time frame for when we're really going to see some disruption in this space. But stage three is intelligent discovery. So Professor Susskind, Dr. Susskind says this is in automating document production, which we're already starting to see, but electronic legal marketplaces where a lot of this stuff is completely and totally automated, depending on your vantage point, what you're working on. These are the things that people are starting to think about. So how does this come to be? Like we've talked about some of the algorithms, some of the AI in this space. Hold on for 1 second. So these are the components in AI. There's a boatload, and a lot of these things, as you can start to see, are things we're familiar with. So if you're using Siri or using Alexa, speech to text, text to speech, all of that fun stuff, the image recognition, we see that every single day. So that's one of those things that we're aware of. When you're talking about specifically on the legal side, what you need to think about is the part that's in yellow up there. So the machine learning that we've talked about, the natural language processing, these are the bits and pieces that we start to see. So the deep learning, the supervised learning, this is what people are most focused on in the legal industry right now. Now, what makes AI important and how do you start to bring all these components together? There are three distinguishing factors that really make AI flourish. So we have the processors, we have the memory, but now you need three components. So you need AI expertise. Those are people that fundamentally know how to program the AI, know how to create the algorithms, know how to pull off the shelf algorithms. There's tons now. So you can go to open source places and pull off the shelf algorithms that do something. And they tell you, this is great for natural language processing. This is great for mapping or whatever you want to say it. That's one part of the pie. The next part is domain expertise. So if we're talking about AI in the legal space, you need to have people that know their domain, someone in IP or someone in maybe in certain component within the litigation space who know that area cold. So they can help the people that are creating those algorithms to focus in on certain words or legalese or whatever the case is. But one of the biggest things that people need to think about when it comes to AI is the data. So that's why we see Google and Facebook. I mean, when we hear this thing that I hate saying, but I'll say it anyways, data is the new oil. It truly is, because the more data we have, and now you have these algorithms, which are sophisticated, but are pretty much everywhere, and you have the domain expertise, all three of them are very, very important. So there's different groups that get involved in this thing that have expertise in this. So it starts to come together. So all three are integral component for this going forward. Now, so what are we about to see and what are we seeing right now in the legal space in terms of current and near-term projects? Question and answering. We're definitely seeing this right now. So within legal research, so much more advanced than it even was 5, 10 years ago. My goodness, far more advanced than 10 years ago. So factoid and non-factoid information, statistical and interactive conversation. So me just saying, hey, X, I really want to know more about this case in this jurisdiction, focused on these three concepts. And we're going to start to see that serve up to you information that will make things far easier. Natural language generation. So generating natural language descriptions of data and events. Again, summarization of documents and events, far easier than ever before. Risk mining and event detection. So all of that is a component. Dialogue systems and chatbots. We're going to see more and more chatbots as we start to experience things in the legal industry that'll make things easier for you as a practitioner, but it also makes a big difference for those, maybe for those who need access to justice, to just make common sense of things that can be very complicated very quickly, as you all know. So these are the bits and pieces that we're starting to see filter into the space. So moving ahead with the complexity of legal analytics and AI, analytics is huge in this space. We start from the left-hand side and we work our way all the way up to the right-hand side. So at the very beginning, we're talking about search, which has gotten much better, all the way up to legal strategy planning. Can you imagine a machine helping you with your legal strategy? We're getting there. We're getting there. So artificial intelligence, the legal boom era. These are the disruptors. Not all of these are AI disruptors, but a lot of them are. The way that I used to look at this is that I have a lot of attorney friends, you know what they said, you know what I want to do? I know my craft very, very well. And I also see that there's some pretty cool technologies that are out there. Can I leverage those technologies, bring it in with the craft that I know really, really well, and come up with a company that makes a ton of sense? And so over the last 5 years, we went from about 300 legal tech startups to about 3,000 around the world that are doing bits and bytes of all sorts of things. And with affection, I've said this before, I think of them as sort of ankle biters. They're going after these really cool components of certain practice areas or certain parts of the practice or business of law. And they're going after that. They're going after that. And they do really well in that space. But there's just so many of them now. And it's having a disrupting effect across the board, but helping people get access to justice, helping people process things that they've never been able to do before, and understand the law, understand the way that they can help people in many different respects. So what does this look like? Well, the way that I sort of bucket this, and Michael Mills, of course, from Neurologic bucket this as well, is 5 essential components. So we have expertise automation. That's like the Neurologic, that's the Oracle, that's Riverview. So areas that people helped craft tools in this space. Then you have legal research, and there's a boatload of different companies that do that. Of course, Thomson Reuters being one of them in terms of Westlaw. Then there's a whole other group of analytics and prediction. This is, to me, bonkers. You're able to predict what a judge might decide on something if you have a similar case, similar evidence. You're getting to the point, and that's a massive growth space. So analytics and prediction is one of the biggest spaces that I think will grow when it comes to AI in the law going forward. Contract analytics, a no-brainer. You know, having it go through 10,000 employment agreements and looking for golden parachute language, things like that, right? So you can able to do that rather than have 100 attorneys do that. You can now have a machine serve up most of that and then find a subset of those to do that. And of course, the old dog of the bunch, e-discovery and machines to help us sort through that sort of material. So the categories here in the legal landscape, and this is something that I think Legal Geek put together. There's a legal analytics, prediction, the legal research, so same sort of thing, the e-billing, all of these components start to come together. So AI, when it comes to everyday applications, I'll go through this a little more quickly because I think we've touched on some of these. So contract review, and there's pluses and minuses for all this stuff. So in-house legal departments can spend 50% of their time basically trying to look at a contract and say, can this document be signed? That's all you need to do, right? I mean, is it clean? Is it clear? Is it readily available for people to access the information, the basics on this contract? There's opportunities, but there's also some risks. So JP Morgan was able to come up with something that they developed that saved 360,000 hours that they would have probably had to either their attorneys work on or outsource that to some law firms. Positive and challenges there. Due diligence. So lawyers ensuring contracts, of course, are not hiding obligations. So I was kind of talking about this already. So if you have two firms or two organizations, they're merging. And we're talking about 10,000 employment records on both sides, or agreements on both sides. And all you need to do is find a subset, maybe 10 contracts on both sides that have the golden parachute language. And you want to make sure you pull those out because they need special attention. AI will help you do that, save tons and tons of time. Going back to Richard Susskind, the AI that's available right now in search, he says, is akin to junior lawyers from yesteryear being able to categorize large bodies of documents, pull out the pertinent documents, the relevant documents to argue your case. Big deal. Other languages, natural language processing, e-discovery. Won't spend too much time on this. You get the idea. Culling through 1 billion documents, having a computer with its algorithms, looking at a subset of that information, relevant words, concepts, ideas, pulling that out, making it easier for your lawyers, your attorneys to be able to make decisions based on that. So developing methods of increasing technical complexity to reduce that volume. Opportunities and risks there. AI, prediction technology. So back to the idea of judges and the head tilt saying, really, can we be predictable? Yes, based on their summaries, what they've written, the way that the dockets have proven out to say, this individual, she's ruled on this particular type of matter multiple times, and she's ruled in this certain direction. You can see trends and you can look at the data, the big data, to be able to understand what's ahead and what could potentially happen, which helps you strategize, helps you make decisions based on information that you now can have readily accessible because AI makes it possible. IP. On the IP side, we're talking, of course, about being able to go through all of this documentation and images. Has this been done before? Of course, the opportunities and risks there, being able to unpack some of this information in terms of trademarks, similar types of trademarks, so you don't have to spend as much time on it, makes things a little bit easier for everyone. Analytics, we've kind of talked about this, but this is the ability, of course, to extract actionable knowledge based on some of that information that is out there. All right, knowing that we're shorter on time, the expertise automation is also a piece of this. So people building out models, almost Q&A models, to say this should happen, then that should happen. Drop in this paragraph, drop in this piece of law, whatever the case is, these citations to help make and bolster your case. But it builds out those processes in a much easier way going forward. And of course, Ebilling is a part of this. So being able to predict, if you pull in a certain matter that has similar use cases to what you've done in the past, you're able to say, okay, how much time is allotted for X number of attorneys to do Y work going forward? You're able to match those things up, and you're able to predict what this use case is, or not use case, what the how much time and effort should be allotted to this in terms of the project management of that particular matter going forward. All right, in the closing seconds here, what we're talking about here is an ecosystem of technology, technologists, attorneys, practitioners, and all of this starting to come together. So what you see on the screen right there are all these different groups. It might be the ILTAs of the world, so International Legal Technology Association, the legal geeks of the world, the Codex over at Stanford, which basically is a genius idea. And they basically combined their engineering school with their business school, with their law school. They get everyone together and they say, you know what, let's come up with ideas together. And from that, they've birthed a bunch of different companies that have done very well. Harvard's involved in this. You got lots of different groups that are highly invested in this space because it makes sense. We're at a point where we really need to start to think about this a tad more as we start to practice in this space. So that's in essence what we're talking about today. Now, if you have questions, I'm definitely available to talk about this a little bit more going forward. You could see some of the topics that I touch on. And there's this overlay of artificial intelligence and blockchain and cybersecurity and the cloud, because we're starting to converge and bring this all together to a point where artificial intelligence interacts with blockchain, which is a database, right? So they start to come together. And from that, you're seeing workflows being built out in the legal industry to leverage all of these things to make the practice of law hopefully a little more seamless and easier for you as well as your organization that you work at. All right. Thank you very much for your time. I'm Joe Raczynski. I'm here and available to help. I have a team of technologists, technical client managers that also work with me to help spread the word, conceptualize things in this space. So if there's anything that you'd like to discuss, feel free to reach out. But if not, thank you for joining today. Really appreciate it. Thank you.